Welcome and welcome back. I'm B. This is part two of Black people who survived horror movies. So if you haven't seen part one yet, be sure to check that out after this. Black characters in horror don't always die first, and in this video, I'm highlighting even more survivors who made it to the end. Some fought their way through, and some had some close calls, but they all lived to see the credits roll. And of course, this isn't a comprehensive list. There are plenty of other Black horror survivors out there. All right, so let's get into it. First up, we have Alexa Woods, played by Sanaa Lathan in Alien vs. Predator. Alexa is definitely an underrated final girl in horror. She's brave, resourceful, and doesn't hesitate to take charge in a situation that most people wouldn't survive 5 minutes in. From the moment she's introduced, we see that Alexa is no nonsense. She's a seasoned survival guide and an expert in extreme conditions, which makes her a perfect candidate for the expedition into the Antarctic. And when things start going south, she adapts fast. While everyone else is getting picked off one by one, Alexa aligns with the Predator to stay alive, and that alone makes her one of the most unique final girls in horror. I love seeing Sanaa Lathan in this kind of role. She's mostly known for romance, drama, and comedy, so seeing her hold her own in an action-heavy horror movie was such a nice surprise. And she doesn't just survive, she earns the Predator's respect, which is no small thing. They even mark her as a warrior by the end, which is pretty epic. Alexa Woods is a definition of a badass final girl, but she doesn't get talked about nearly as much as she should. She's strong, she's smart, and she takes charge in a way that feels natural, not forced. If we're talking about horror heroines who deserve more recognition, she's definitely on that list. Next, we have Reese Wilson, played by Loretta Devine in Urban Legend. Now, we all know Loretta Devine is usually cast as a nurturing, motherly figure, but in this movie, she steps into a different role, campus security. And honestly, she's one of the film's highlights. Reese is the campus security officer at Pendleton University, and she takes her job seriously, sometimes a little too seriously. She's a huge fan of Pam Grier, which is hilarious because she tries to channel her energy but doesn't always succeed. Still, she brings some much needed personality to the movie. But when the urban legend inspired killings start, Reese gets caught in the middle of chaos. She ends up getting injured but manages to survive, which is always a win in horror. Not only does Reese survive Urban Legend, but she also makes it through the sequel Urban Legends Final Cut. Now, I've never seen Urban Legends Final Cut, but from what I read, she also plays campus security again, and once again, she survives. She even helps take down the killer, which is pretty rare in horror, especially for a Black character making it through two movies. Reese is one of those characters you can't help but root for. She's funny, she's determined, and she's not afraid to step up when things get dangerous. Loretta Devine really made the role her own, and it's always fun seeing her in something outside of her usual typecast roles. Next up, we have Dr. Karen Benson, played by N'Bushe Wright in Blade. When it comes to vampire movies, a lot of people don't make it out alive, but Karen, she's smart, resourceful, and manages to survive in a world overrun by bloodsuckers. Dr. Karen is a hematologist who gets caught up in Blade's war against vampires after being bitten early in the movie. Instead of panicking, she uses her skills to develop a cure for vampirism and even helps Blade fight off Deacon Frost's crew. She's not just a damsel in distress, she actively contributes to the fight. By the end of the movie, Dr. Karen is still alive, which is rare for human characters in this franchise. Dr. Karen decides to focus on her work, telling Blade to come find her when he needs a cure. It's a solid ending for her character, even though we never see her again in any of the sequels. Now, when we talk about Black survivors in horror, we don't hear much about the ones from Blaxploitation horror movies, and to me that's wild because these films gave us strong, smart, and resourceful Black characters in horror movies. One of them is Dr. Gordon Thomas from Blacula, but for some reason his name rarely comes up when people talk about Black men who survived horror movies, and that needs to change. Gordon Thomas, played by Thalmus Rasulala, is a pathologist who starts noticing strange deaths around the city. Unlike a lot of horror characters who ignore all the signs, he picks up on what's going on pretty fast. He's methodical, intelligent, and refuses to back down when he realizes he's dealing with something supernatural. He approaches the situation like a detective, using logic and evidence to figure out the truth. If more horror characters were like him, a lot of movies would be much shorter. Then we have Michelle, played by Denise Nicholas, who is more of a supporting character, but she plays her part in the fight against Blacula. She's also one of the rare Black women in early horror movies to survive, which is huge considering how often Black characters were killed off. Dr. Gordon Thomas and Michelle prove that intelligence and quick thinking can get you far in horror. Blacula is remembered for its title character, but these two played their part in the classic film. And the fact that they survived, that just makes their contributions even more important. It's time we start talking about them when we discuss Black horror survivors. And then we have Scream Blacula Scream, which is the sequel to Blacula, bringing back William Marshall as the iconic Black vampire. While sequels can be hit or miss, this one stands out because it introduces voodoo into the story and gives us some strong Black characters who actually survive, and that's Lisa and Justin. Lisa, played by the legendary Pam Grier, is a voodoo priestess who plays a key role in the movie. She's intelligent, confident, and the only person who stands a chance against Blacula. Blacula wants Lisa to help cure him of his vampirism using voodoo. But by the end of the movie, she realizes that there's only one way to stop him, by stabbing his voodoo doll and ending his reign for good. Then we have Justin, played by Don Mitchell. He almost doesn't make it. Blacula is seconds away from turning him into a vampire, but Lisa intervenes just in time. While he doesn't play as active as a role as Lisa, he still manages to survive, which is rare in older horror films where Black men were often killed off. Now, going back to Lisa, she's not just a survivor, she's the reason Blacula is finally stopped. And while Justin doesn't do as much, he at least gets to live to see another day. Scream Blacula Scream may not get talked about as much as the original, but Lisa and Justin's survival makes it worth remembering. Next up, we have Abby Williams, played by Carol Speed in the movie Abby. Abby is often called the blaxploitation exorcist, and while it definitely has similarities, it still stands on its own. Instead of a child being possessed, we have Abby, a grown woman who gets taken over by a Yoruba trickster spirit. And let's just say that demon was very messy. From the moment she's possessed, Abby goes through a full transformation. Her voice changes, she becomes violent, and she develops a vulgar, taunting attitude that makes the exorcist Pazuzu seem almost polite. But despite all of that, she's not doomed. Her father-in-law, Bishop Garnet Williams, played by William Marshall of Blacula, performs an exorcism to free her. And by the end of the movie, Abby actually survives, which isn't always the case in possession films. Along with Abby, her husband, Reverend Emmett Williams, played by Terry Carter, and Bishop Williams also make it out alive. While the exorcism takes a lot out of them, they manage to send the spirit back to where it came from, saving Abby in the process. Abby doesn't get talked about as much as other possession movies, probably because it got pulled from the theaters over copyright issues with The Exorcist. But it's an important part of Black horror history. Abby's survival is rare for this kind of story, and Carol Speed's performance deserves way more recognition. And if nothing else, we have to acknowledge that this was one of the messiest demons in horror history. Up next, we have Isaac, aka Ike, played by Glenn Turman in JD's Revenge. JD's Revenge is often considered an underrated blaxploitation horror movie. Instead of dealing with vampires or demons, this one focuses on a man being possessed by the vengeful spirit of a murdered gangster. It's part horror, part psychological thriller, and it gives us some strong Black survivors: Isaac, Christella, and Reverend Elijah Bliss. Let's start off with the main character, Isaac or Ike. Isaac is an ordinary man who unknowingly becomes the vessel for J.D. Walker, a gangster who was murdered decades earlier. As J.D. takes over, Isaac's entire personality shifts. He becomes more aggressive, violent, and focused on getting revenge for J.D.'s death. But once the truth is exposed and vengeance is achieved, J.D. finally leaves Isaac's body, allowing him to return to his normal life. Reverend Elijah Bliss, played by Lou Gossett Jr., is one of the most important characters in the film. He's a well-respected preacher with a complicated past. His family's legacy is tied to the crime that led to JD's murder. While he may be a man of God, he is also holding on to some dark secrets. Throughout the movie, he plays a key role in unraveling the past and ultimately makes it out alive, even as the truth comes to light. Christella, played by Joan Pringle, is Isaac's girlfriend. She sees the changes in him and knows something isn't right, but she doesn't abandon him. She stands by him even as things spiral out of control, making her one of the few women in horror at the time to survive a film dealing with possession. And just to be clear, I mean that she's one of the few Black women in horror to survive a film dealing with possession. Glenn Turman delivers a great performance, seamlessly switching between Isaac and JD. And with Isaac, Christella, and Reverend Bliss all making it out alive, JD's Revenge is one of the few older horror films where multiple Black characters survive. It blends supernatural horror with psychological drama, making it a unique entry in blaxploitation horror. Moving on from blaxploitation horror movies but staying in the 70s, next up is Peter, played by Ken Foree in Dawn of the Dead 1978. Dawn of the Dead is considered one of the most influential zombie movies ever made, and Peter is one of the standout characters. He's a strong, capable survivor who plays a major role in keeping the group alive for as long as possible. Peter is a SWAT officer who teams up with a small group of survivors after the zombie outbreak spread. From the beginning, he proves to be the most capable person in the group. He's level-headed, strategic, and isn't afraid to make the tough calls. Whether it's securing the mall, fighting off both zombies and looters, or keeping the group together, Peter is the reason they last as long as they do. As the movie goes on, things fall apart. One by one, the group is picked off and Peter is left as the last man standing. At first, it seems like he's about to give up, even holding a gun to his head in what looks like a final moment of despair. But at the last second, he changes his mind, fights his way through the zombies, and escapes in the helicopter. It's one of the most memorable endings in horror history because so many characters in zombie movies don't make it out alive, but Peter does. And just a side note, Francine does also make it out alive. That's why I emphasize man, but Peter is the last actual man standing. Anyway, Peter is a solid character and Ken Foree delivers a performance that still holds up today. Dawn of the Dead helped set the standard for zombie movies, and Peter's survival is a huge part of why it's still talked about decades later. He's smart, he's capable, and proves that in a zombie apocalypse, you want someone like Peter on your team. Before I move on, I just want to quickly mention Ving Rhames in Dawn of the Dead 2004. He plays Sergeant Kenneth Hall, a strong and capable character who makes it onto the boat at the end. The reason he's not officially on this list is because of the ambiguous ending credits, which strongly suggests that none of the survivors, actually made it. Since we don't get confirmation of his survival, I decided to leave him off the list, but he's definitely worth mentioning. Now we're going to talk about some children who survive horror movies, and one of them is Tyler, played by Jeremy Silvers in Child's Play 3. Tyler is a cadet at Kent Military Academy and ends up being the latest target of Chucky after the killer doll sets his sight on a new body to possess. Unlike Andy, who's been through this nightmare before, Tyler doesn't realize the danger he's in at first. He treats Chucky like a new best friend, which at some points had me thinking, now Tyler, didn't your mama teach you better? But to be fair, he's just a kid and he doesn't know any better, at least not at first. As the movie goes on, Tyler slowly starts to understand that Chucky isn't his friend. He spends a lot of the film running and trying to escape, and in the final showdown at the carnival, he's nearly taken out. But thanks to Andy's intervention, Tyler survives and makes it to the end. Tyler might not be the most proactive horror survivor, but he does what any smart kid would do. He runs. He learns to fight back when it counts, and in the end, he makes it out alive. For a franchise where most people don't make it past one movie, that's impressive on its own. Up next is Mark Petrie, played by Jordan Preston Carter in Salem's Lot 2024. Salem's Lot has had a few adaptations over the years, but in 2024, Mark Petrie is played by a young Black actor. Mark proves that age doesn't matter when it comes to making it out of a horror movie alive. Mark isn't just some scared kid, he's brave, resourceful, and knows how to handle himself when things go south. He's a horror fan, which works in his favor because he understands the situation faster than most people around him. Instead of freezing up or making reckless choices, he uses what he knows to stay alive. And in this version of Salem's Lot, Mark is Black, which adds another layer to his character's presence in horror. By the time the dust settles, Mark is one of the last people standing. He doesn't just survive by luck, he earns it by staying aware and doing what needs to be done. It's always good to see a young Black character in horror who isn't just there to be scared or sacrificed for the plot. Mark Petrie is a solid survivor and one of the highlights of Salem's Lot 2024. While we've seen this character in other adaptations, it's great to see him survive once again, proving that you don't have to be an adult to outlast the horror. Up next is Nolan Samuel, played by Percy Daggs IV and Anthony B. Jenkins in the movie Never Let Go. Nolan and Samuel are brothers and their personalities couldn't be any more different. Nolan starts to question everything while Samuel never doubts his mother's warnings. Their contrasting views make their journey even more intense as they try to navigate the horror surrounding them. Never Let Go follows a mother and her two sons as they struggle to survive in a world where an unseen evil forces them to stay inside. The movie focuses a lot on their mother's fight to protect them, but Nolan and Samuel prove that they are just as much a part of the story. Through every terrifying moment, they manage to hold their own and make it through to the end. Both Percy Daggs IV and Anthony B. Jenkins deliver strong performances, making Nolan and Samuel feel like real, fully developed characters. I consider them rising stars, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what they do next. Never Let Go gives us two young Black survivors who make it to the end, and that's always something worth highlighting in horror. Next up, we have the Wilson family from the movie Us, played by Lupita Nyong'o as Red Adelaide, Winston Duke as Gabe, Shahadi Wright Joseph as Zora, and Evan Alex as Jason. The Wilsons are one of the few fully developed Black families in horror, and they don't just survive, they fight tooth and nail to make it out alive. This family goes through absolute chaos but still manages to stick together. In Us, the Wilson family's vacation turns into a nightmare when they come face to face with their doppelgangers, known as the Tethered. Each family member has to fight their own twisted counterpart, and it's not just about physical survival, it's psychological, emotional, and deeply unsettling. Throughout the movie, the Wilsons prove that they are resilient and resourceful. Whether it's Adelaide's brutal determination, Gabe's strength, Zora's speed and quick thinking, or Jason's ability to outsmart Pluto, they all contribute to their survival. They don't just rely on one person to protect them, each family member plays a role in making it through. The Wilsons are one of the most memorable Black families in horror, not just because they survive, but because they feel like a real, unambiguously Black family. Their dynamic, their humor, and the way they handle the horror around them all make them stand out. Moses, played by John Boyega in Attack the Block, is a teenage gang leader who goes from petty crime to full-on hero when his neighborhood is attacked by vicious alien creatures. He's not just fighting to survive, he's fighting to protect his block and prove that he's more than what people assume about him. This horror sci-fi film blends alien invasion with social commentary. When the creatures start hunting people down, Moses and his friends quickly realize that no one is coming to save him. At first, he sees the attack as just another problem to deal with, but as things get worse, he takes on the responsibility of leading the charge. We see him evolve from a reckless teen to someone willing to risk his life for others. By the end of the movie, Moses is still standing. He doesn't just make it out alive. He earns his survival by facing the aliens head on and outsmarting them. His journey is about more than just escaping. It's about redemption and stepping into the role of a true leader. Moses is a strong lead who carries the movie, and John Boyega delivers a performance that made him a star. Attack the Block is a great mix of horror and sci-fi, and Moses' survival is one of the best parts of it. He's proof that sometimes the best final characters aren't just fighting monsters, they're fighting for their own future. Last but not least, we have Childs, played by Keith David in The Thing, 1982. Now, I was going back and forth on whether to add Childs to the list because the ending of The Thing is ambiguous, but Childs physically made it to the end credits, so in my mind, he counts. Childs is one of the crew members at the Antarctic Research Station, and while tensions rise as paranoia sets in, he holds his own. He's skeptical, cautious, and doesn't trust easily, which honestly works in his favor in a situation where no one knows who's human and who's not. He spends most of the movie keeping his guard up and making sure he's not caught off guard. The ending of The Thing is one of the most debated in horror history, and after all the chaos, only two people are left, Childs and McCready. The base is destroyed, they're stranded in the freezing cold, and neither one of them knows which one is infected. The movie fades to black, leaving their fate unknown. But since we physically see Childs at the end, he qualifies in my book as a survivor. Keith David plays the role of Childs perfectly, balancing confidence, suspicion, and that signature intensity. The Thing is a horror classic, and while we'll probably never get a definitive answer about what happens next, one thing is for sure, Childs made it to the credits, and that's enough for him to be on this list. Alright, so that was part 2 of Black People Who Survived Horror Movies. Let me know how you feel about the characters on this list, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more horror and sci-fi content.